Hello, everybody. This is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Part 2, Chapter 12. In the first weeks after Levin returned from Moscow, every time that with blushes and a trembling in his limbs he remembered the shame of his rejection, he would say to himself, "I suffered like this, and I felt that I was ruined when I was rejected on account of my physical condition and had to go into the second class. And it was the same when I bungled in my sister's affairs, which were confided to me. And now the years have gone by, and I look back with astonishment on those young tribulations. And it will be just the same with my disappointment this time. And time will pass, and I shall grow callous." But 3 months passed away, and the callousness did not come, and his pain remained as severe as on the first day. What troubled him the most was that after dreaming so long of family life, after being, as he thought, so well prepared for it, not only was he not married, but found himself further than ever from the goal of marriage. Almost painfully he felt, as those around him felt, that it is not good for man to live alone. He remembered that before his departure from Moscow he had said to his skotnik, Nikolai, a clever mushik who he liked to talk, "Do you know, Nikolai, I'm thinking of getting married." Whereupon Nikolai had replied instantly, without hesitation, "This ought to have been long ago, Konstantin Dmitrich." And now never had he been so far from marriage. And the place was taken, and if he had been able to settle upon some young girl of his acquaintance, he felt the impossibility of putting Kitty out of his heart, and the memories of the past still tormented him. It was idle to say that he had committed no sin. He blushed at these memories as deeply as though they had been the most disgraceful of his life. The feeling of his humiliation, slight as it really was, weighed heavier on his conscience than any of the evil deeds of his past. It was a wound that refused to heal. Time and labor, however, brought their balm. And the painful impressions, little by little, began to fade in presence of the events of the country life, important in reality in spite of their apparent insignificance. Every week brought something by which to remember Kitty. He even began to await with impatience the news of her marriage, hoping that this event would bring healing in the same way as the pulling of a tooth. Meantime, spring came, beautiful, friendly, without treachery or false promises, a spring such as fills plants and animals, no less than men, with joy. The splendid season gave Levin new zeal. It confirmed his resolution to tear himself from the past so as to reorganize his life on conditions of permanence and independence. The plans that he had formed on his return to the country had not all been realized, but what was most essential, the purity of his life, had not been stained. He could look in the faces of those who surrounded him without any humiliation. He could look in the faces of those who surrounded him without any humiliating sense of having fallen or any loss of self-esteem. Towards the month of February, Marya Nikolaevna had written him that his brother's health was failing and that it was impossible to take proper care of him. This letter brought him immediately to Moscow, where he persuaded Nikolai to consult a physician and then to take the baths abroad. He even induced him to accept a loan for the journey. Under these circumstances he could, therefore, be satisfied with himself. Besides his farm labors and his ordinary reading, Levin undertook during the winter to study of rural economy, in which he began with this premise that the laborer's temperament is a more important factor than climate or the nature of the soil. Agronomic science, according to him, must not neglect either of these three equally important elements. His life, therefore, was very busy and full, in spite of his loneliness. The only thing that he felt the lack of was the possibility of sharing the ideas that came to him with anyone beside his old nurse. However, he brought himself to discuss with her about physics, the theories of rural economy, and, above all, philosophy, which was Agafya Mikhailovna's favorite subject. The spring was rather late. During the weeks of Lent the weather was clear but cold. Though during the day the snow melted in the sun, at night the mercury went down to 7 degrees. The crust on the snow was so thick that wheels did not sink through. It snowed on Easter Sunday. Then suddenly, on the following day, a south wind blew up, the clouds drifted over, and for 3 days and 3 nights a warm and heavy rain fell ceaselessly. On Thursday the wind went down, and then over the earth was spread a thick grey mist, as if to conceal the mysteries that were accomplishing in nature. The ice in every direction was melting and disappearing. The rivers overflowed their banks, the brooks came tumbling down with foamy, muddy waters. Towards evening the red hill began to show through the fog. The clouds drifted away like white sheep, and spring in reality, was there, and all her beauty. The next morning a bright sun melted away the thin scales of ice which still remained, and the warm atmosphere grew moist with the vapors rising from the earth. The dry grass immediately took a greenish tint, and the young blades began to peep from the sod like millions of tiny needles. The buds on the birch trees, the gooseberry bushes, and the snowball trees swelled with sap, and around their branches swarms of honeybees buzzed in the sun. Invisible larks sent forth their songs of joy to see the prairies freed from snow. The lapwings seemed to mourn for their marshes, submerged by the stormy waters. The wild swans and geese flew high in the air in their calls of spring. The cows, with rough hair and places worn bare by the stanchions, lowed as if they left their stalls. Around the heavy fleeced sheep gamboled awkwardly the young lambs. And children ran barefoot over the wet paths, where their footprints were left like fossils. The peasant women gossiped gaily around the edge of the pond, where they would bleach their linens. From all sides resounded the axes of the moujiks, repairing their shoki and their wagons. Spring had really come.